He wasn't a monster lurking in the shadows like Jack the Ripper. He didn't wear a mask or even hide his identity. He didn't use a weapon or spill any blood. Instead, he used a needle and the trust of his innocent patients. And for over 20 years, this trusted doctor had become one of the most hated men in the UK, as he took the lives of over 250 people in his care, slowly, silently, one injection at a time. Join me as I explore one of the world's most prolific serial killers and how he got caught. This is the story of Harold Shipman, also known as Dr. Death. When we talk about serial killers, we often think about the likes of Ted Bundy or Jack the Ripper or Jeffrey Dahmer, all with methods of brutal and senseless violence that is beyond the visceral comprehension of our imagination. Rarely do we hear of serial killers in trusted positions of society who use covert methods that are so meticulously thought out that nobody finds out for decades. The trusted position being in healthcare, trained and honoured to help heal our bodies, the one thing that we truly ever own. This is the harrowing story of Harold Shipman, the doctor that abused his position for over 2 decades, taking the lives of over 250 innocent people. Born on January 14th, 1946, Harold Frederick Shipman grew up in a working class family in a council estate in Nottingham with his 2 siblings. His mother Vera was everything to him, but Shipman's life changed drastically when Vera was diagnosed with terminal lung cancer, and as a teenager, this tore him apart. Watching his mother die a slow and painful death without the ability for him to do anything, he felt powerless, a situation that most of us will not cope well with. On the night of his mother's death, a 17-year-old Shipman ran for miles in the pouring rain through the streets of Nottingham. It destroyed him, and the trauma of his mum being taken away from him was just the beginning of what many believe drove him to inevitable madness. During Vera's later stages of the disease, she was administered morphine by a doctor at her home. A young Harold Shipman would watch as his mother's chronic pain would dull, and this would later be a key clue as to what Harold would do in his later years. A couple years later, he begins studying medicine at Leeds University and begins to date a farmer's daughter called Primrose Oxtoby. And just in the first year of university, they conceive their first child, which was likely unplanned, and decided to get married. A few more years pass and he eventually graduates in 1970, becoming a junior houseman at Pontefract General Infirmary in West Yorkshire. He and Primrose would go on to have a total of 4 children, despite the chaos he would soon create. During the 70s, Shipman develops a serious drug habit with pethidine, the pain-killing drug used to help women in labour. Injecting it into his arms and legs, he takes 700 milligrams of the drug per day while suffering from chronic depression, caused by what he said, the opposition to his ideas for improving the practice he joined in Todmorden, the lack of control causing him internal turmoil. He'd been prescribing large amounts of the drug to a few patients that he would take for himself, and the suspicions came to light after he was admitted to hospital that he was taking the drugs for himself. Appearing before Halifax magistrates in 1976, he admitted to the charges against him, but was only fined a total of £600 compensation to be paid to the NHS, and undergoes psychiatric treatment in a York-based facility for what they called a serious medical problem. This was just the beginning of Shipman's falsification of documents and dark addictions at just age 30. Things were about to crank up a notch. After his addiction fiasco in 1979, Shipman moves to Hyde, Greater Manchester, with his family and begins working as a GP. By now, he and Primrose have a total of 4 children, a seemingly functional and loving family from the outside. Then in 1985, the police investigate the possible murder of one of Shipman's patients, but no action is actually taken and he continues to practice medicine. Another 7 years go by and Shipman opens his own practice in Hyde's Market Street, to which he grows a clientele mainly of elderly women who love and trust him. He becomes a favourite of theirs, earning their trust as an at-home doctor who comes out to visit them when they need. he would be seen looking very calm and caring, no one suspecting of what would actually come of it. But in November 1997, a local undertaker called Debbie Massey noticed several unusual deaths among Shipman's elderly patients. She noticed that they were found fully dressed, sitting upright, with no family and no witnesses around them. Massey and another local GP called Linda Reynolds report their suspicions to the local coroner, which prompts a police investigation in March 1998. But of course, this was merely a superficial and rather lazy investigation, to which they found no cause for concern. This was the first real warning that became a crucial missed opportunity authorities would soon be ripped apart for, as by this time, unbeknownst to them, Shipman goes on to unalive 3 more patients. In June that same year, 1998, a former mayoress of Hyde called Kathleen Grundy suddenly dies at the age of 81. Known for her charitable work and active involvement in local civic organisation, this came as a shock to many, as Kathleen was apparently in rather good health, despite being quite old, even described by her daughter, Angela Woodruff, as being full of life and energy. So to her and many others, this was a complete surprise. Kathleen's body had been discovered at 11:55 AM by 2 colleagues who had become worried when she failed to turn up for a pensioners' luncheon club. Found fully clothed and on the sofa in the living room, they immediately called her doctor, Harold Shipman, who came over and gave Mrs. Grundy's body a hasty look and pronounced her dead, stating that her cause of death was, of course, old age. Her funeral has hundreds of people in attendance as they mourned the death of a phenomenal woman. But things became very suspicious as her daughter Angela was told that her mother's will had directed her entire estate to be given to her trusted doctor, Harold Shipman. After seeing the will, she immediately suspected that it was a forgery because she had a will signed by her mother, leaving the estate to her previously. And unbeknownst to Shipman, Angela herself was an experienced solicitor. But how could they explain that they suspected her own doctor forged her will and likely unalived her too? Then when Mrs. Grundy's body was exhumed on August 1st, 1998, a massive discovery was made that would initiate one of the deepest investigations in the UK's history. Morphine was found in Mrs. Grundy's body, specifically in the muscle tissue, an indication that someone had pumped the drug into her system, causing an overdose. And that's exactly what happened. Kathleen had been visited by Shipman on that day, June 24th, to take a routine blood test. But without Kathleen's knowledge, he had pumped her veins with a lethal dose of diamorphine, a death sentence that took her life within 3 mere hours in her own cottage. You see, Shipman had sloppily tried to destroy her reputation in an attempt to cover his tracks by falsifying her medical records to suggest that she was abusing codeine, which can break down into morphine after death. He had added a false entry in December 1996 of scrawled handwriting, constipated, drug abuse at her age, codeine, wait and see. But detectives were already suspicious of Shipman's actions, as Kathleen Grundy was known to be energetic, smiley and talkative, even at 81. So this was simply not in her nature. Then as an arrogant, Shipman is eventually charged with her murder in September. After being interviewed at the police station, he slowly begins to break under the pressure, initially beginning the interviews with a superiority complex towards the interviewing officers, attempting to belittle their intelligence and knowledge within medicine and biology. He begins to realise that they know more than enough to get him put away for a very, very long time. The will that he had forged was incredibly sloppy, and he didn't realise that the entries he had made on the computer had left a digital audit trail that actually recorded when entries into medical history were actually made. Despite trying to alter the entry dates back up to 6 months in the past before they died, the computer's software logs the actual date of entry completely separately, almost like a signature. By the end of the month, Shipman is on his knees on the floor of the police station, begging for a solicitor to tell the police that he was unfit to be questioned. This was the beginning of the end for Shipman's demented spree. In January 2000, Shipman had been found guilty of murdering 15 women from the same method of Shipman injecting them with diamorphine. The same digital paper trail led to falsified records in almost every account, with carelessly backdated entries trying to trick anyone who looked into the victim's medical history. Harold Shipman, a man who believed he was smarter than he was now the most hated person in the country. The killings shocked the nation, as it was a trusted medical doctor of the NHS who took the lives of innocent elderly women in their own homes. It sent shivers down the public's spine, as the speculations that there were more victims became a harrowing reality. The government then initiated a 4-year inquiry into Harold Shipman, becoming one of the UK's biggest inquiries in history. Formerly known as the Shipman Inquiry, it began in 2001 with the goal of uncovering how Harold Shipman was able to murder hundreds of patients undetected for over 2 decades. Phase 1 is when the inquiry begins, examining the 15 cases for which Shipman was convicted of murder. The intention of this phase was to establish a baseline for Shipman's sinister behaviour and modus operandi, to which they confirmed that all his patients were healthy and killed using the same method of using injected diamorphine with calculated methods devoid of any mercy. Phase 2 was to investigate all the deaths that occurred under Shipman's care, which was over 500 cases. It concludes that he had at least 215 victims, with the likelihood of the real number exceeding 250 patients, all with a clear pattern of lethal injection, followed by fake death certificates. Phase 3 shifted its focus to how Shipman obtained a large amount of controlled drugs, such as diamorphine, that he used on his victims. They found that he abused the prescription systems by forging medical records, exposing the rather lax controls and a systemic failure to monitor high-risk drugs. Phase 4 was to investigate the warning signs that authorities failed to act on. This included when the undertaker's colleagues, other GPs and the coroner had raised the red flags to police, who superficially investigated and led to Shipman getting away with literal murder. Phase 5 investigated how Shipman managed to continue working and murdering as a well-trusted GP for over 2 whole decades, despite a conviction for forging prescriptions back in 1975. Phase 6 was the conclusion to the long and expensive inquiry, with its final report confirming that Shipman was indeed a serial killer in a highly regarded position of trust, who had killed at least 215 people. The inquiry exposed the systemic failures in death certification, GP oversight, and drug monitoring. And despite being a complete hog on resources and costing over £21 million, it led to significant changes within the medical sector and how law enforcement is supposed to investigate these such crimes, although some aren't convinced that these changes have had much of an impact. Just before the final phase of the inquiry, Harold Shipman was found hanged in his cell at Wakefield Prison in the morning of 13th of January 2004, the day before his 58th birthday, showing no remorse for his actions or empathy towards his victims, or giving authorities any information on the true number of victims he had. He wasn't missed by anyone, and it did not stop the inquiry from finishing. Shipman was a rather confusing man. There was no definitive motivation for his murders, only a lot of indication that he had an obsession with it. Authorities were completely baffled, as there was no motivation for revenge, there was no sexual gratification, and no financial gain, apart from Grundy's case, which seemed like more of a test to see if he could get away with it. Some experts believe that the clumsiness of falsifying Kathleen Grundy's will indicated that he subconsciously wanted to get caught, to gain recognition for his self-perceived cleverness and arrogance that was likely narcissism. Why was it predominantly women he targeted? Nobody is entirely certain, although their vulnerability and ability to be charmed by his somewhat trustworthy persona meant that he was more likely to get away with it, and less questioning his authority in healthcare. The link between his mother's death and his actions later on in life aren't completely understood, but the trauma it left is almost certainly acknowledged as being a direct impact in the decisions that he had made to become the world's most prolific serial killers.